cause, and we have Floyd Abrams on the line. And while our technology is actually working, this connection between an actual telephone and our up-to-date system that can't handle telephones, Floyd Abrams is the author of a book that I just thought was terrific, The Soul of the First Amendment. I recommend it to everybody. It's really short. You can read it in a couple hours, but it is just incredibly illuminating. He is a titan in defending the First Amendment in the Supreme Court. As I said before, he worked the Pentagon Papers case and Citizens United, so he has gotten flack from the left and the right, and that's what we like to hear. We like to hear a man who stands up for free speech no matter who's doing it. Mr. Abrams, are you there?
I am there. It's good to be on.
Thank you. I'm really happy to have you. I loved your book. It really was an eye-opener. I'd like to actually talk about the book a little bit. Some of the stuff that really surprised me. First of all, some of the history angle, the fact that the First Amendment, there were people among the founders who argued against the First Amendment because they thought we didn't need it. Isn't that right?
Exactly. Alexander Hamilton was one of the leaders who basically was against the Bill of Rights at all. And basically said, well, why do we have to write down all these things the government can't do? For one thing, we're going to forget some things. We're not going to list all of them. We never empowered this new federal government to do these things. Why do we have to say they can't do them? And it was Jefferson and some of the people who were more chary, more concerned about this area. Jefferson said, "I'm astonished to find that people in this country should be contented to live under a system which takes away freedom of religion and freedom of the press." And that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth.
I mean, over time, it seems that was the much wiser argument.
It sure was, and we'd be a very different country, if we had simply relied on the proposition that, well, since the Constitution doesn't say that the federal government can't take your rights away, therefore they can't. The idea of writing it down, first of all, making it part of the document, and making it law, not an essay, not a poem, not aspirational, but law, enforceable by the courts, was itself an enormous achievement.
And at the same time, you write about the fact that the First Amendment essentially lay latent for a long time, and it's like nobody referred to it.
That's right. I mean, for the entire 19th century, there weren't any cases. I mean, there were situations of free speech being limited. I mean, abolitionists were put in jail in some places in the South because of what they said. President Lincoln, suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War, and some northern editors were jailed, but no one ever really got around to making a serious constitutional challenge to what was happening. And it really wasn't really the second half of the 20th century when most of our First Amendment law really started to be fleshed out.
And it shows how revolutionary it was that almost nobody thought to say you can't do that because of the First Amendment. It shows how out of the consciousness.
Absolutely.
It was. So what?
And if you think, go on.
What changed? When did this really start to change, and why?
I think it really changed with World War I and the opposition to it by socialists and anarchists, including Eugene Debs, who ran for president, got like 3 million votes and wound up in jail because he gave a speech saying basically that it's a bad war, and basically he went to jail on the theory that if you say things like that, fewer people are going to enlist. That's going to be bad for the war effort. And those are the cases which started with the very great dissenting opinions of Justice Holmes and Justice Brandeis. But we're already into the 1920s when we talk about those opinions. And it really wasn't till, as I said, the mid-20th century, and in particular, I would say, the classic case was the 1964 case of New York Times against Sullivan. That's a case in which a Southern white jury rendered a very big libel judgment against the Times for an advertisement, actually, about Dr. Martin Luther King's treatment while he was in prison. And it was a time when enormous judgments were being entered by Southern juries against what I'll call the national press for their coverage of events in the South. And the Supreme Court wound up saying that as regards public people, public figures, public officials, that they couldn't recover in a libel case unless the language was not only false, but known to be false or suspected to be false by the people who have articulated them. And that was a big deal. And then the Pentagon Papers case, it was just 7 years later, and that was another very big deal, which really solidified the proposition that the government, even in the course of the war in Vietnam was on, can't go to court except in the most extraordinary circumstances and get an injunction, a prior restraint against the press publishing material. We're talking really, we're talking the 3/4 of the way into the 20th century.
Now, I know you worked on the Pentagon Papers case. Did you actually argue that before the Supreme Court?
Professor Alexander Bickel from Yale Law School argued it, and I was co-counsel with him, but he was the one that argued it.
So then you got flack on that. Obviously, the Republicans, the conservatives were not happy about that, but then you came back around and you did Citicens United, which we've never ceased to hear from Hillary Clinton. You were also on that case.
Right, and I was one of the two people who argued that case. I represented Senator McConnell in that case. You see, I think they're both on the same side. The conservatives, including some people at my law firm, who said Addison Fields represent traitors when we were representing the New York Times. And a lot of my friends on the left during Citicens United, who were saying, how can you possibly defend the big corporation spending lots of money about who's elected? And from my perspective, they were both, really clear cases in which you really have to allow the speech, and if you don't allow the speech, you're cutting back on core, absolutely central First Amendment principles.
So here was the part of your book that actually shocked me, and I think it will shock a lot of people, especially there are a lot of younger people in my audience who have been living essentially at the high watermark of free speech. Right now, it's I don't know what you would say that would get you arrested in this country. But you talk about, I know that in the old days, it was a lot of times conservatives who were fighting against free speech to things they thought were pornographic and so forth. But right now on the left, there seems to be this theory that essentially would make the First Amendment disappear. And you talk about Justice Priere specifically writing about this theory. Can you explain what this theory is?
What Justice Priere was saying is, look, the First Amendment is not just an individual right, that it exists to assure that the government actually represents the views of the people by being sure that the people can speak out, etc. And my view is that while that sounds attractive, and indeed one of the results of living in a society in which people can speak out is that, we hope, at least now and then, Congress represents the actual view of the public. But I think it's very dangerous to start talking about the First Amendment as being focused on making the government work better or be more responsive. The First Amendment is a limit on the government. It exists to be sure that the government doesn't overstep the bounds into areas of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and for the way I view it, and the way a number of people on the Supreme Court viewed it, the very notion of saying that the core at the center of the First Amendment is making sure that government is genuinely representative of the views of the public has it all wrong. The purpose of the First Amendment is to avoid censorship by the government of views, most of all, about the government.
Right, because otherwise the government would be deciding what was good for the government. I mean,
absolutely.
So
absolutely.
How many justices on the Supreme Court do you think are sympathetic to Breyer's argument?
Well, 4 of them signed on to that opinion.
Wow.
As to whether they all would really do so in a later case, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't really think, for example, Justice Kagan is really prepared to go that far, although she did join an opinion which expressed that view. But it could be as many as 4.
So it's possible that if Scalia had not been replaced with a conservative, the First Amendment would have completely changed its meaning, basically. It's possible.
Well, yes, it's possible. It's possible. I mean, and as you've said, and I've said, it's certainly possible that a case like Citicens United would have been reversed. See, and to me, the notion that, here a conservative group made a movie denouncing Hillary Clinton in 2008 when she was the likely Democratic candidate, an hour long, that they wanted to put on pay for view, and the idea that could be criminal if it went on television or cable or satellite within 60 days of an election or 30 days of a primary seemed to me antithetical to what the First Amendment is most about, which is allowing criticism of government officials or people who seek to be president, no less.
It's amazing. I mean, the New York Times actually attacked you for this, right? They attacked you for.
They sure did. Yes. Like a longtime client.
That's right. You're old pals. The New York Times.
Yeah. No. That's. I mean, from the point of view of liberal America, campaign finance is writ into law as if it were the Constitution. Wow. The sort of anything goes if Congress passes it, and again, to me, that simply ignores core heart principles of the First Amendment itself.
Well, let me ask you a final question. Looking into the immediate future, I mean, I've heard Donald Trump say some things about libel laws that sent a chill up my spine. But what are the things you fear most in terms of the First Amendment?
I would say most of all, 2 areas. One is an expansive use of the Espionage Act so that it could rope in journalists. I mean, the Espionage Act was written literally 100 years ago, 1917, during World War I. It's phrased very broadly, and there are very few cases under it. Indeed, none involving journalists as such. So, while I think that what I'll call my side, the journalist side, the First Amendment side would win if the administration were to come down hard on journalists under this law, you can't be sure of that because the language of that is very broad. The other thing I'm most concerned about is on college campuses. Yeah. Where all about that, and remember, the First Amendment only applies when we're talking about the government, state schools, etc. Private schools are allowed to do what they want about inviting, not inviting, loading the dice when they invite speakers, etc. But not state schools. I mean, they're bound by the First Amendment, and they're not allowed to, in effect, to ban Ann Coulter because of her views. And that's one of the things that has been going on in one way or another, either by university administrations or by students, making it impossible for certain views, and in this case, they do tend to be conservative views, from being heard on campus.
Wow. Floyd Abrams, you are a hero to my people. I really appreciate your coming on.
You.
And your book, The Soul of the First Amendment, absolutely terrific. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right. So that is a guy who argued both the Pentagon Papers and he didn't argue the Pentagon Papers. He worked on that, but he argued Citizens United. That's what you like to hear, right? You like to hear a guy who stands up for anybody who's talking. But this is one of the things that if you heard as we've been going along, you all know if you've been listening that when Donald Trump first started running, I was appalled. And if you heard me soften a little bit toward Donald Trump, this is one of the reasons reading this book when I realized we dodged a bullet. These guys are literally arguing that what the First Amendment means is that speech should be free if it helps make the government better. So who's going to decide that? The government. And what Mr. Abrams is saying is that no, the First Amendment says, get out, government. You cannot stop us from saying what we want to say. And, you know, it is a shame. It is a shame that our media has gone so crazy that they've almost made it so that the First Amendment, they're embarrassing the First Amendment, but still they have the right to say what they say. It's as long as I have the right to come on and make fools of them as they make fools of themselves. So let's